I'm going to show you 5 simple steps to switch from CentOS or our upstream vendor or Scientific Linux or any of those enterprise Linux-based distributions to Oracle Linux. Thanks to the Oracle Groundbreakers tour for having me and for having us and for having this virtual tour, which means we can talk to folks all over the world. And shout out to Eric, who's driving. So hopefully you're not watching as well, Eric. I want to start off by this interesting statement, just to highlight this. We will support your existing Red Hat and CentOS servers without requiring a reinstall. So if you've got machines that are running RHEL or they're running CentOS and you want Oracle to support them, you don't actually have to touch anything and you don't have to replace everything and you don't have to reinstall anything. What you're essentially doing and what the script is going to do that I'll show you in a second, it's going to switch your update source from your current location to Oracle. Now, what this, everything that I'm going to say today is from the perspective of Oracle. It is based on our license, our terms and conditions, our requirements for support, etc. By switching your current servers across to Oracle, everything we can say is that we support you. You're going to want to check with your vendor that you've got now in case they have some rules and regulations you might have to abide by. And that's up to them. So just a shout out from an Oracle's perspective, we don't need anything to change. So I know folks like a demo, so let's get started with that. This is a CentOS box. So this is CentOS 7. So running CentOS core. So it's a minimal install. This is our first demo. We're going to start off small, start me off light. Let's become root. I'm going to grab my script. I'm going to make it executable and I'll time it. I'm going to start running it. Now, while this talks, let's go back to our presentation. We can talk about a few things here. First up, I downloaded the switch script. Now, we provide the switch script on our linux.oracle.com site or the Unbreakable Linux network. The script automatically reconfigures a CentOS machine from CentOS to the Oracle Linux update servers. It also synchronizes all of the release packages. So what it's going to do, and we'll see it in a second as it chugs away here, as it goes around, it starts to automatically trust our GPG keys, which you can see it happening there. It updates all of our release steps. So the first thing I did is download that script. And if you go to linux.oracle.com/switch/CentOS, the instructions for the script are published at that location. I made the script executable, chmod +x. If you're a old school Linux admin and you don't like that, you could have gone bash CentOS 2.0 and just run the script that way if you like. And then I started running it. That's what's happening now. The process that it undertakes is it determines all of the CentOS packages that we need to replace. Things like CentOS release and certain reporting tools and certain packages that just don't exist in Oracle Linux because CentOS added them. It builds a list of packages it needs to replace. It builds a list of packages it needs to install. It builds a list of GPG keys that it needs to add for trusting, and then it starts installing that. The other thing it does is it synchronizes the Oracle Linux distro, so it's going to bring everything up to the latest version. It's also going to install the UEK and set the latest UEK to be default. So it takes about 4 minutes. It's busy running at the moment in its final distro sync to do the update. The last thing I'm going to do is a reboot. Now, that's, if you'll notice on the left-hand side, that's optional. And I'll show you once that demo is finished that even before the reboot, the system looks like Oracle Linux. So let's, while that chugs away, talk about why you'd want to switch from CentOS to Oracle Linux. First up is the uncertainty of CentOS. Now, it used to be that CentOS was a downstream rebuild of Oracle Linux, a downstream rebuild of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, a lot like Oracle Linux is. Red Hat releases a package, CentOS rebuilds it, and it was a one-to-one or as close to one-to-one mapping as you could get. It was a way of running what looked like a RHEL clone near production. So you didn't have to, pay for it. You didn't have to manage it as closely as you did with production systems. Nowadays, however, and particularly in the CentOS 8 and newer versions, CentOS has become an upstream of Red Hat. So the way Red Hat have restructured CentOS means that Fedora is their development distribution. That's where cutting edge or mainline work happens. CentOS Stream has become the upstream of Red Hat. That's where packages from Fedora stabilize. And then RHEL is built and will be built. So RHEL 9 is going to be built off CentOS Stream. It has unpredictable release dates. We've seen this with CentOS 7 and CentOS 8 now, where the time from a Red Hat major or even update release to a equivalent CentOS release is growing, in some cases up to a few months. We can particularly see this, and there's a graph on our website around errata releases. Oracle strives to have an equivalent errata release out within 4 to 6 hours from upstream. CentOS has been hours to days to longer. Whether that distribution is compatible and up to date based again on those dates, and also based on what CentOS is now adding to their distribution along with CentOS Plus and CentOS Extras, means if you are not careful around your configuration, you could sort of drift or deviate away from a production. But at all times, it means that your production, if that's on Red Hat, and your dev test are not running the same systems. And if you want 24/7 support, historically, that has not been available. Nowadays, there is an option to switch things, but we reckon you should switch to Oracle Linux. The other benefit about switching to Oracle Linux and replacing CentOS with Oracle Linux is that you can use it anywhere, everywhere, and only pay for the support that you want. So there's no all or nothing requirement here. You can have Oracle Linux in all your developer workstations, all your development servers, QA, dev, test, anywhere you like, and then just choose which servers you want to support. So it's done. That conversion took 3 minutes and 45 seconds. If I now look at etc OS release on this box, it is Oracle Linux. And it's updated. I'm going to reboot this. We'll come back to it in a sec once it's finished rebooting to see that it'll actually boot up into the UEK. So that's our first one. Now, I'm going to do a second demo. And before I start, the second demo was going to be a migration or a conversion of RHEL to Oracle Linux. But I can't do that. The reason I can't do that is not technical. I could not download Red Hat Enterprise Linux. There are no methods, options, availability to download Red Hat Enterprise Linux with terms and conditions, with T's and C's that allow me to demonstrate this. The restrictions around what you can do when you download RHEL mean that I can't demo things, I can't use it in production, I can't use it for anything but development, and that's kind of fairly well controlled. So I wanted to give you a Red Hat demonstration. I can't, unfortunately. So what we're going to do, let me just SSH back into this, and we can do a uname -r on my test server. There you go. It's running our latest UEK 6 build. So that's my EL server that's been upgraded. Fantastic. What I'm going to do is come out of that guy, and I'm going to go to this machine. So here's a CentOS desktop running. So what I figured, my second demo, considering I can't type my password apparently, because I can't demo another distribution being converted to Oracle Linux, what I'll demo is a more complex installation, if you like. So this is a full server with GUI installation of CentOS. You can see it's got the lovely CentOS down in the corner. Let me just reset. I'll just do wink. Go. Let me reset into System Tools, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to become root. I'm going to download that switch script. I'm going to make it executable, and I'll time this one. Oops, that's what I want to time. There we go. And away it goes. Again, exactly the same thing. It's going to inventory the system that it's got. It's going to determine what packages to replace, and it's going to start that process. The other one took 3 minutes, 45 seconds. My machine's quite quick today. This one takes about 8 minutes to replace the system. So while we're doing that, let's talk about this. For a Red Hat box, can't show it, but I'll talk about it. First off, we have to remove all the subscription manager packages. So there's a list of packages that we can give you. It's also in a couple of scripts, but anything that's basically starts subscription-manager, you can do a yum remove. As soon as you do that, of course, it's going to disconnect from any Red Hat update services. If you have Satellite 6, it's going to disconnect from that. So you kind of want to be sure that this is something you want to do and that you have any necessary packages, or you can get them from Oracle to convert it. So the next step is to get our GPG key. We publish those on yum.oracle.com. So you can go to yum.oracle.com. You can check the FAQ has it, and the Getting Started guide has it, which links to our GPG keys. We also publish them on oss.oracle.com if you want to find a location. That's going to allow you to trust and verify the packages that you download from Oracle. I always recommend enabling GPG checks when you do any Linux installations. You're going to install our release package, so Oracle Linux Release, to enable our Yum repositories. Because Oracle Linux is free to download, free to distribute, free to use any way you like, and we provide all our errata for free, there are no entitlements, there's no subscription manager, there's no registering to Satellite 6 or registering to Red Hat or registering to your vendor to enable updates. Every Oracle Linux server comes pre-configured to receive updates at install time. So what we need to do is basically install that release package that enables all of Oracle Linux's base repositories that will have all of our updates in it. So that's generally with CentOS 6 and 7 or CentOS 7 and 8, you can do a Yum swap. So Yum swap, Red Hat release, Oracle Linux release kind of works. They're nice ways of doing that replacement. I'm hoping to have a script that'll do it like the CentOS one, or an update to the CentOS one that will do it. I'm just tweaking it again because I can't work with Red Hat. I have to send the script to somebody who has Red Hat, get them to test it, tell me what the results are, I can tweak it, send the package back, and so on and so forth. So developing this is kind of interesting. Finally, we do a Yum distro sync. The Yum distro sync, once we've configured the Oracle Linux repositories, is the simplest way to replace all of Red Hat's imagery or their trademarked logos, the stuff that you get that can be contractually restricted from Red Hat. It's their trademarks and their copyrighted stuff. It does also update your system to the latest version. So we always recommend that. You should always be on the latest version, but it's something to keep in mind that switching, the easiest way to switch is to Yum update either before or after, but as part of the process to come up to the latest version of every package. If you can't do that, if you have a system that is running another distribution that you cannot change certain versions of packages, you can't make any, it might be all of them, it might be specific ones, I encourage you to engage Oracle Linux consulting services. We can do in-place migrations of existing distributions without changing the versions of packages, but it's the kind of thing that we don't necessarily want to script, or if we do, we build the scripts based on your environment, because at that point, if it's that restrictive, if you're going, well, I want to switch, I want your support, I want your updates, but I don't want to change anything on the box at the moment, we want to make sure that we get everything right, because it's the kind of scenario where if you get it wrong, the implications could be more challenging than a normal migration, which you just Yum update to. So how are we doing? We're cleaning up. So we've done it's already done the major. You'll notice my background has changed, by the way. I don't know if you clocked that one. It was a CentOS 7 background. It's now an Oracle Linux background. I touched nothing. The replacement system already did it. And it's one of those things that shows you that you don't need to reboot. Again, that switch to Oracle, I noticed it didn't get the scaling of the background right. I might have to work on that one. But it is done, and it's Oracle Linux now, and it's getting updates from Oracle, and it's cleaning itself up. And that's pretty much going to finish at this point, but I'll come back to that in a second. Why would you want to change from Red Hat to Oracle Linux? This is the interesting one. And this is a question we get a lot. Sell me on Oracle Linux. It's why we have a sales team. One, it's easy. You can switch. And I think I demonstrated that it's pretty simple to go from Red Hat to Enterprise Linux without a lot of effort. But the big one for me, I've come from and I've been in the open source world for decades. And I came from the open source space before I joined Oracle. And I've been the open source guy at Oracle for a very long time. And I will admit, I haven't really looked at the switch system until this year, because that was always something that our sales team kind of managed as part of the sales effort. You know, it was something that we offered as part of sales. And as a product manager, I kind of going, well, I didn't pay much attention. And then this year, you know, this came up and Francisco from Groundbreaker said, hey, do this presentation. You're in Melbourne, we're in Melbourne, let's do this. And so I started looking at it, and I started really getting into what it took to replace Red Hat and what the nuances were. And then I tried to download Red Hat because I wanted to test it. And the amount of lawyers I had to get involved from Oracle's side to tell me whether I could do this or not was quite high. So there are contractual limitations from Red Hat, and I'm not making an opinion on those limitations. I'm just telling you that they exist, that prevented me from demonstrating a rel conversion and limit your usage of their product. The contractual limitations say how much support you have to pay, how much you can use, where you can use it. Every option that Red Hat have released is an additional component. So if you want centralized management, you have to pay for the management entitlement. If you want replicated storage, you need to pay for gluster server, or you need to pay for Ceph storage. If you want a cloud native environment, you have to then add on OpenShift. If you want virtualization, you have to add on Red Hat virtualization. So everything adds on, and your complexity becomes exponentially greater. You then have to manage not just entitlements on a per server basis, but it could be on a per instance basis. If you start looking at containers based on Red Hat, you get and hats off to Red Hat, you get the UBI, the universal base image. That's great. It's cost free. You can download the UBI. But if you add an additional package to that, it immediately, or a specific outside the scope of what is included in the UBI, it becomes rel. And then it triggers a support subscription requirement and triggers all sorts of then changes in licensing. From our perspective, we are 100% application binary compatible. In the 14 years we've been doing this, we've had 0 compatibility bugs logged with Oracle. So much so that we no longer test Oracle products on Red Hat. When we develop, when we certify, and when we support Oracle Linux Oracle products, things like Oracle Database and Java and Fusion Middleware and WebLogic and all of those things, we actually don't test them anymore and haven't tested them for a while on real Red Hat. We just test them on Oracle Linux. And the certification on Oracle Linux is sufficient for us to certify on Red Hat because we're absolutely 100% binary compatible, application binary compatible, which means any binary compiled for Red Hat will run on the equivalent version and architecture of Oracle Linux. So a binary compiled for an x86 build of RHEL 7 will run unmodified on an x86 build of OL 7. More importantly, we are free to download, free to distribute, and free to update, and free to use. At no point do you need to pay to use Oracle Linux, to update Oracle Linux, to share Oracle Linux in any environment, even with our logos included. So we don't have a requirement that you have to strip our logos or strip the word Oracle from our distribution. You can put it anywhere. My sales team gets kind of annoyed when I tell and remind folks that they only have to pay for the components they want support for, but it's true. You get to pick the systems for which you want support, and the way we do support is pretty simple. If you've got a physical box and you can point at it, you pay for it, and that's it. We don't count by CPU, we don't count by instance, we don't count by virtual machine, we don't count by any of those things. In the cloud, it's kind of weird because you can't point at a machine in the cloud, and there's some ways to calculate that because the cloud is somebody else's computer and you can't see it. But it's also pretty simple there as well. Once you've paid nowadays for Oracle Linux support subscription, it's all included. If you have an Oracle Linux support subscription for a machine that's running a hypervisor, we prefer Oracle Linux KVM. But if you're using a third-party hypervisor, that's fine too. All the instances of Oracle Linux that you can stuff onto that physical machine are covered by the one support subscription. Again, it's by physical. So if you've got, if you need hypervisors that then run Oracle Linux, you can pay for one support subscription, which is Oracle Linux, get a hypervisor, and get all the instances supported in one go. And then if you're going to start running cloud native components on that stack. So you've got a physical machine running a hypervisor with Oracle Linux instances, and now I want containers. If those containers are based on Oracle Linux, they're covered too. One support subscription. And we kind of just keep adding stuff to our Premier support. As product managers, this makes our life easy because we don't have to deal with product codes and entitlements and prices and stuff. The sales team wish they had more to sell, but they've just got a thing. It's called Oracle Linux, and we've included pretty much everything in the Premier support. If you have Premier support, you get Oracle Linux, you get Ksplice, you get KVM virtualization, you get spacewalk management, you get Oracle Linux Cloud Native Environment, you get Gluster distributed storage, you get high availability using HA proxy and Keep Alive D, you get, load balancing using HA proxy and Keep Alive D, high availability with Coruscant Pacemaker, all of that kind of good stuff. OLVM, which is Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager, included as well. That's based on Overt, and it's all in the one support subscription. If you don't need all the bells and whistles, we do have a smaller support subscription called Basic, which kind of is just Oracle Linux, Spacewalk, and the KVM virtualization, but not the manager. So you can chop and change. And you can chop and change. You can have a bunch of servers at Basic. Remember, it doesn't include Ksplice, which is our zero reboot update option. And you can have Premier, and you can have a mix of those and nothing, which is kind of nifty. So if we go back to my CentOS desktop, which is now no longer a CentOS desktop, it took 7 minutes and 48 seconds to reboot. Let me just hit the reboot because it's going to show you the boot screen as it turns around. There we go. It is now Oracle Linux Server. And before anybody asks why I'm running VMware instead of VirtualBox, there is a reason, and it's to do with all the technical video shenanigans that I'm doing to have the picture-in-picture in the camera. VirtualBox didn't quite have the right video set up for this, so I would have preferred to use VirtualBox, but I had to go with VMware just for my fun demo to work. And now it's Oracle Linux. It's converted. You'll notice down at the bottom of the login screen, if you can see that way, it says Oracle Linux, and there we go. So that's why we think you should switch across from RHEL to OL. And I think I promised 5 steps. There were only 4 steps. We download the script, we make it executable, we run the script, and then we reboot. And nobody pointed that out. I'm looking at my chat screen over there, but none of you pointed it out. Step 5 is relax. That's it. I was told that I had to come up with 5 easy steps to migrate. And there weren't 5, there were 4. And technically there are only 3 because the reboot is optional. And we could drop it down potentially to 2 if we don't need to make the script executable. We could put the reboot in the script. The upshot on all of this is the amount of steps that you have to take is tiny. You can get from a CentOS distribution to a RHEL distribution to Oracle Linux in under 10 minutes and in under 5 steps. The benefits from this, the fact that you've saved an awful lot of money, the fact that you can now have the freedom to do what you want with the operating system that you've got. The fact that you've got, and this is kind of interesting, the same Oracle Linux powering your infrastructure that we run Oracle on is very powerful. This is one of those things that Oracle has as a unique component. Oracle Linux is Oracle Linux. We use and ship and distribute to our customers exactly the same Oracle Linux and kernel and packages that we put on our engineered systems. So the Exadators and the Exalogics and the big data appliances and the zero data loss appliances and other engineered systems, PCA and PCC and those sorts of things, the private cloud appliance and the private clouded customer. Those are all the same Oracle Linux. There is nothing custom on those machines. They're specifically configured, sure, and they've got great hardware, but there's nothing unique to them. That then gets extended to Oracle Cloud. We run Oracle Cloud on Oracle Linux. The virtual instances that you run on Oracle Cloud are running on Oracle Linux KVM. And the same hypervisor is on your distro. The Oracle Linux that you spin up inside an instance on Oracle Cloud is the same Oracle Linux. We are the only cloud vendor in the world that gives you the same operating system distro to run on our cloud that you can run on anybody else's cloud and on-prem. So you can have the same operating system available in all clouds, in all on-prem, on all x86 and now on ARM hardware as well. We released Oracle Linux for ARM a couple of years ago now, so it's available on things like the Cavium Thunder X2s, the Ampere eMag, and the upcoming Ampere Ultra stuff. It's available on a Raspberry Pi, so if you've got Raspberry Pis, you can run Oracle Linux on it. I have like 9 just on my desk alone underneath here. So it's that ubiquity of being able to run the same operating system, the same versions, the same hypervisor, the same scripts everywhere. Pretty powerful. Finally, if that was too much work for you and you feel like, I'm sorry, I can't do that much work, I need something else, we have Oracle Linux Consulting Services. We can actually do all of that hard work for you. Part of that includes creating a transition strategy, inventorying your existing environment, working out the amount of different instances you've got, working out what we're going to migrate from, how we're going to migrate, what existing contracts may in place, what we need to replace, for example, like how we deploy K-Splice, how we implement things like cloud native environment to replace components like OpenShift, deploying gluster for replicated storage. We can look at Oracle Linux KVM deployments to replace third-party hypervisors like VMware or Hyper-V. And then again, looking at the sort of integration between Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager and any sort of automation tools and that kind of stuff. And finally, depending on your size or complexity or scale or geographic sort of scope, we have technical account managers. These are folks that interact between and the customer and yourself and Oracle product management, Oracle support, Oracle development. And they get you a closer relationship, not just from a support perspective, not just, they're not somebody who hits the escalate button on an SR, though they can do that too. But they also engage with us in product management so that so that we can get meetings with you to feedback what you need, what you want. And then we have sort of ongoing meetings with you, meetings with the TAM. It's a pretty nice relationship. I'm in meetings with my customers who have TAMs fairly often. And the nice thing about those is you can get really technical. I mean, we've had some really deep dive conversations with our customers through those meetings to get a real amazing sense of how they're using our product beyond what we ever imagined. So that's pretty nifty. That is it. I did say to Francisco and the Groundbreakers team that this was a pretty short session because switching from Oracle is pretty quick, or switching to Oracle Linux is pretty quick. There are some messages, but I think, host, do you have the questions or do I? Let me go and look at the chat. Q&A. Aha. I see some questions. Do the switching scripts require you to register? No, they don't. That's the first one. The question: do you require registration at linux.com, linux.oracle.com/register? No, you don't. You can switch using our Oracle Linux Yum server, which requires 0 registration, and you can switch without any support at all. So you can take a system that is supported and you can switch it across. Oliver does also point out he's a partner in Indonesia. And there is a switch process that we document at linux.oracle.com/switch.html that is different. That's true. There are 2 ways you can switch. The switch process, the old legacy switch process that has been around for years, uses a registration process. So you switch your registration from your current vendor across to ULN, or the Unbreakable Linux Network. And that was around even before we started releasing our updates on yum.oracle.com. Now that we've got those updates, we've updated the switch script, and I'm hoping to update that page at some point as well. So you don't need to register. You can choose which one makes the most sense to your customers based on their current environment. For example, if they have a low count of servers, it may be fine to register them with ULN as part of the switch because you want that management interface. If you've got more than a handful of servers, it may make more sense to create an on-premise management tool like deploying Spacewalk locally and then switching using Spacewalk. One of the nice things about the scripts is while they're currently set to use Oracle's Yum server, so yum.oracle.com, it's pretty easy to actually modify the scripts to use your own Yum server. You could have a local mirror, you could have Spacewalk, you can do those sorts of things to make that switching not just more efficient, but never leave your network. A good use of Oracle Linux Consulting Services is to create a switch script or a switch process specific to you. So, you could just mass migrate all of the machines that you've got at the moment. I think that's all the open questions I've got so far. So I've done that. Any other questions from, you've got the Q&A open chat. I can read it now. So you're welcome. Thank you. If there are any other questions, I'll be around. I know it's only it hasn't been that long. So if you have any other questions, by the way, or share this presentation with other folks, remember you can ask the questions on the Groundbreaker website on the replay screen, and I think that gets emailed to me. And I'm always happy. You can email me if you know how oracle.com email addresses are formed. It's my first name and my last name at oracle.com. Around this question, don't just email me random questions about the meaning of life. But if you have any questions about switching to Oracle Linux, do let me know. Probably best via the Groundbreakers website for this. And I'm gonna last call for questions. Anyone? This does work. I think I mentioned it right at the beginning, but this does actually work with Scientific Linux and Asianix. For anybody who has an Asianix instance out there, I have tested it against those. It does work with our upstream vendors version of Linux as well. I've had somebody else validate that for me, but there are still some tweaks to be made on that one. So it's not as seamless as the CentOS one is currently. Cool. Last call. I feel like an auctioneer. If you want, all of our social media stuff is on the screen as well, so do follow us on social media. I'm Avi at Oracle on Twitter, by the way, Avi AT Oracle. So at Avi at Oracle. There you go. You can follow me as well.